Hello, and welcome to a DoneJS LA Hack Night. My name is Jason Lahara, and I'm joined, actually my laptop is all hooked up, so I'm not gonna say hi to the room, but I swear I'm with people. You guys could make sounds if you wanted to. Tonight we're gonna go through a text editor built with the range and selection DOM APIs and CanJS for custom elements in our view layer. I'm gonna share my screen and show you what we're building. Sweet. So yeah, this is what we're gonna build. So basically this is a huge text area that has some default content. You can see there's already some things that are bold. We've got a list, italicized, and we're gonna build these controls at the top. So we're gonna be able to make things bold. We're gonna italicize things. We're gonna have a button for copying everything so that we could paste it somewhere else. And we're gonna have this funky button, which allows us to select things and then give it a crazy style where it changes colors. Yeah, so we're gonna build this. First, I wanna thank our sponsors. So hosting us tonight is Codesmith, not a boot camp, but definitely an awesome learning and education center. If you are into programming and you really want to up your skills, you should definitely check out Codesmith. They're here in Venice, California. I think they also have offices in New York and London. Don't quote me on that. But they have offices elsewhere as well, so check them out. And then Batovi is the company that I work for. We can help you create amazing applications. We work with large and small clients, big companies to nonprofits and startups. And we help them build amazing applications from web applications, public-facing and internal, to applications on iOS and Android and other platforms. So check out batovi.com. And we also have a huge focus on open source. So we build a ton of open source utilities, including CanJS. Let me flip this up. So CanJS is a client-side JavaScript framework. It makes it really easy to build rich user interfaces. So I want to show you the kind of basics of CanJS real quick, because really there's three principles in CanJS. Basically, you want to create a custom element that has a view that's rendered with a view model. So what does that mean? Well, this is an entire CanJS application. So we've got a component from CanJS, and we're defining a custom element tag. So basically, we could put this my counter tag anywhere in an HTML document, and it'll render the component. What will it render? It'll render this view. So there'll be a my counter custom element, and it'll have this view inside. And you see that it has these curly braces, and it has a couple of other interesting syntaxes. This is a stash templating language. So if you're familiar with handlebars or mustache, this will look familiar. Basically, anything within the curly braces will be rendered dynamically, and you can do things like listen for DOM events to do interactive things too. So what does the view get rendered? A view model. So basically, it's a model for your view. It's all of the data and all of the properties and methods that you make available to the view. So in our case, we have a count property that starts off as 0, and then we have this increment method, which just increments the view model's count when the increment method is called. So that's what this whole thing is. If I inspect the page, show it off real quick. So we've got the, let me bump that up. We've got this my counter custom elements. And then inside is rendered the view, so we can see the count, and then we have the button. When I click on the button, remember that's just calling the increment method. So when I click this button, this is what's being called. Count changes, and then that means the DOM is automatically updated. If you've used any JavaScript library like React and Vue or Angular, there's a million of them. All the same basic concept of when you modify your view model or you modify your state, that's automatically reflected in the DOM. You don't have to manage like getting a particular element and setting its text content, or doing any of that like manual management. And that's it. That's how we build these huge applications for the clients that we work with, is basically creating these components. The three parts that you create: a custom element, you define a view, and then that view gets rendered with a view model. That's it. Any questions or comments before we start diving into building a text editor?
You said CanJS is just a framework or a library?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's one thing that we'll talk a little bit in more detail is you can get started with just like an npm install of the can module, or in our case, we're not even going to install anything locally. We're just going to use CodePen for the demo today. So. Cool. Any other questions or comments before we move on? Awesome. So if you have a laptop, go to CanJS.com, and you'll see on the left-hand side there's a guides link. So click on that, and then scroll down under recipes. There's a text editor medium. Click on that. Put your hand up when you've got there. So CanJS.com, and then go to guides and okay, cool. Everyone there?
Text editor medium.
Sweet. So the format of the meetup tonight is we're gonna go through this guide, and everyone's gonna have their own copy of the code that they're running on their computer. And I'm gonna talk about a problem, talk about like the next step of the thing that we wanna do in the guide. And then I'm gonna give you everything that you need to know to be able to implement it on your own. Then I'm gonna give you a few minutes to hack away and try and come up with something. And then we're gonna go through a solution together. So after each section, we'll be able to have everyone caught up. There's a really easy like copy paste button for each of the code examples. So even if you didn't like implement it the same way, I'm gonna do the same thing where after each time, I'm gonna copy and then we'll move on to the next step. So from the text editor, go ahead and click on go down to the setup section. You can click the little table of contents. And then this says, start the tutorial by clicking on the edit on CodePen button in the top right corner of this embed. So if you click on that, that'll open a new window or a new tab that has this pen in it. And this is everything that we need to start. I'll kind of talk a little bit about what's in here. So first is I'll talk about the CSS. We're not gonna go into any of the CSS that's in the pen already. Basically, it's some basic styles around the text box that we'll be using. And then there's a bunch of animation stuff for providing that like funky, multicolored, like dynamic thing. So if you're interested, you can definitely dig into like how that animation works. I'm going to click on there's a minimize CSS editor button. I'm gonna click on that. And then let's talk about the HTML. So right now there's just an H1 that you can see on the right-hand side. That's what's being shown. And then there's a script tag that has a couple of functions already defined. And basically, this is going to save us a little bit of work about doing really boring DOM, like traversing and manipulation and that sort of thing. So we'll probably talk about those a little bit in more detail later. For now, I'm just going to move this up. Okay. And then the last thing that we have is the JS section. And this is where we're going to be spending most of our time today. So there's only 3 lines. The first one is this import statement. So if you've been to a DoneJS LA previously, you'll know that we use JSBin, and we would have a script tag that made the can variable available in our scripts, and we did everything like can.components and things like that. Well, ES modules or ECMAScript modules are native in every Edge browser or every current browser. So Edge, Safari, Firefox, Chrome, they all have support for native modules, which makes it possible for us to do something like this. So now we can import from a package or a library from a URL like this and get whatever code we want out of it. So if you were to just go into your browser, Austin, would you mind closing the door real quick? Thanks. So if you open up this page in your browser, you'll see that it's just a bunch of JavaScript. It's a native JavaScript module. So I copy paste the this URL and I just opened it, and it'll show all the source code that we don't actually care about. So that's how we can import JavaScript, and we can use these named imports. So this core.mjs module defines all of the different parts of CanJS. There are dozens, maybe almost 100 different modules and stuff that you could import. We're just going to need one today. We just need component. And then there's a couple of functions down here that we're going to fill out. So those are just going to be utility functions for us. Any questions about the setup?
How'd you get the blown up JavaScript there?
So there's little handlebars that you can grab the lines.
What are you trying to do?
He showed sort of the path.
Oh, you want to see the core module that you're loading in?
Right.
So you can copy this URL into a new tab.
Which you are.
So
Oh,
here,
this
yeah,
one.
right there.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Just copy that into a new tab. So, which isn't important for this demo, but it's kind of cool to see. Yeah.
So so I'll actually just go back.
That's part of CanJS. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So in our API docs is where we document all of the different modules. So can component is one of the packages that's included in the main can package, and it exports that component name. And there's a ton of these. So these are the APIs that we kind of consider core. There's some observable stuff, all of the view models. We're actually creating new instances of can-define map. So it's a observable map or object type. We've got the same thing for lists. For views, can component is that main thing, and then can stash is the view. So where we have on the homepage in the example, we have this view. This is being parsed by can stash, and that's what's kind of bringing all of the live binding to life. And there's a bunch of other packages that are all kind of included in can. Cool. Any other questions? All right. So let's go to, oh, that's not what I want. Let me pump this back up again. Okay. So we're gonna scroll past the setup section. We already talked about everything that's in here. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to set up a basic CanJS application that has a custom element. So we want to create our own rich text editor elements that we could plop into, include our script and plop it into any HTML page, and our rich text editor renders. Now, inside of it, we want the view to be a div that has the content editable property. This is one of those awesome things that provides so much stuff with just one attribute. So we can see in MDN stocks, this is going to be kind of similar to what we're doing, where we'll want a div and we'll want this content editable property to be set to true. And basically that makes everything inside that div editable. So in their example, we have everything here, and then you can change this willy-nilly, and whatever is in the element that has the content editable property, whatever is in that will be made editable. That's kind of the default value. So we want to do the same thing. We want a div that has that attribute on it, and we also want it to have a class of edit box. This is going to provide some styling for our div. And then we want this to be the default inner content. So inside of the div, this is what we want. And basically the result is going to be something like this. We're going to have our box and it'll have the default content in it. So what do you need to know? Well, we've gone through some of this already. So in CanJS, we'll use component.extends to create a new custom element. So once we do this, then any element with this tag is going to be replaced with a CanJS custom element. And then kind of CanJS will take over and render the view inside of that element. So this is how we want to define a rich text editor custom element. We want to give it a view. So in this example, the view is just an H2 with some text in it. What we want is we want that div with content editable, and then the default content that we had up here. And then I think that's everything that you need to know. So go ahead and take a few minutes to kind of work on the solution, and then together we'll talk about the solution. And if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and I'm happy to help.
So we want to start out by CanJS. So we're importing component. So you want to call component that extend. So right here, and then use a and usually start out much lower level. So anyway, string. So I got the string. You can call it something in the string. This over here. So inside that string, you want to give a tag. So yeah, we're going to call it rich text there. So the thing about custom components is that action is that's how it's written. So then you need another property. And in 100, you have another property to the const. So after the const. And then the next line. If you want your property, you don't have to have the quotes here, but that's a line. That's fine, but they're not. You want to let her call. This is how you're setting up.
And if you have any questions, happy to help.
Now you want to get some HTML. So you want to do that. And then like let's put and type. Spaces.
Like captions.
No space. Just whatever you want. Now you want to do another one of these, but a little different. So you can do so inside the string type in this. Okay, so greater than, but since this is a closing tag, you need to tell it it's a closing tag. It's not slash. So inside, so greater than slash p. So also slash p. Okay. Now you have this rendering from. But now you have essentially so property mixed in equals. It doesn't matter if you have
I think it's because
relatively.
this has to be kept. Yeah. This has to be actually. Because having these run. Yeah.
So you make a couple more changes to make it more. Just to make it more matters. I was just starting out with something. Okay, so I'm going to change the keys to.
After we do all the work.
Just you change a couple small things. I'm going to change the keys to a div.
Like right there.
Yeah, so yeah, okay, better at div closing. So now leave your cursor where it was. Div, space. And then type all one word for content. And then equals. And then double quotes. And then the true. Right? True inside of this. So now you have a small issue since you're using double quotes. It thinks that it ends here. And it's new string starts here. I see you can use it. You can. Do you want to replace these with single quotes? Yes. The quotes that wrap it. If the text editors are less certain, just do this. That. And then go again. Scroll to the right. You can. Sure. Yeah. How would you remove these? So for the single quote, but now you have this text area that you can edit. Yeah.
That's fine. We're gonna take that. Yeah. Because this has to have to be. Wait, where's text and then so it's calling the tab. Oh, that's lit. That's why you do that, because you get like less HTML, so it doesn't look so close.
How are people feeling about progress they've made?
Syntax is weird, but
Brett, how are you doing?
I'm just new to CanJS. I have no idea.
What do you usually use?
React. I think
Oh,
it's
okay.
React. Yeah.
Awesome.
it works the same way.
Sorry, what's
Sort of. It works the same way, sort of.
Right.
Like, yeah.
At the surface, it looks like it does, but then you get underneath the hood of like how things are happening, and it's like so different. It's really weird.
Really?
Yeah.
Have you ever tested React?
Oh yeah, yeah. The last 2 projects I was on were React.
But you prefer React?
Yeah, over React I do.
Why?
So React has this weird like virtual DOM diffing thing it does. Have you looked into that at all? So like when you make a change on a React component, it calls the render function, right, every time. And so what the render function is doing is it actually is loading all of that into a virtual DOM, and it's comparing that virtual DOM state to what's on the page, and then anything that's different is updated. So in CanJS, it works a little different. When you say render like a text element to the page, it's all bound, live bound to an observable. So if that item updates, that text node is the only thing that updates. It doesn't do that whole diffing process under the hood.
Okay.
So that's kind of like one of the fundamental differences to it.
I'm gonna look into CanJS. This is my first time even hearing about it.
It's pretty neat. Yeah. It can be intimidating, especially since there's like so many. It's super modular, and there's so many packages. A lot of people, I think, get kind of scared of just the vast number of them. But to like build most apps, there's kind of like 5 or 7 main packages you really need to know about, something like that.
Yeah. Now you really just need to use can component for a lot of things, but
Oh yeah.
we like understanding that view models are backed by can define map, and understanding stash and stash
Right.
bindings.
Right. Exactly.
Just to pick up on a thing that you said earlier. So like a really simple example of like the difference between CanJS and React and updating is when I click this this plus button, you'll notice that Chrome highlights in the elements pane what's being updated. So in this example, the only thing that is changing in the DOM is that count, right? Is this span, right? So the only thing that's like being shown updating in the elements pane is just that span. The span is highlighting because its text content is changing. And then obviously the number inside it changes too. But nothing else has to re-render or anything like that, or be diffed or anything like that. So
the end result is the same. Either way, React is only updating the text node, where CanJS is only updating the text node. But the difference is Can is tracking, hey, these are all the text nodes that are bound to this value. So this value changes, and we update these. Whereas React, they re-render it, and then they see what changed, and then they update those things. So in some situations, it ends up being a lot slower. In some situations, it can be faster. So I mean, it's not like one is right and one is wrong. They're different, and each one has its own advantages.
I would say basically when you're starting to render lots of things, then you want the minimal like DOM updates that CanJS provides, versus if you have a lot of things and some of them may need to re-render, then like, React is fast, and I don't mean to diss it or anything. Just CanJS scales a little bit better in that specific like use case. So.
So if you like React and you kind of want to move towards CanJS or learn more about it, we actually have a product called Island, which allows you to use React's view layer. So you can write your templates in JSX and use like the React component, but you can back it with our observable objects. So because React typically, out of the box, it doesn't have observability. Yeah. And you know a little bit about observables? Do you want to touch on that real quick?
I want to actually continue with what we're doing. So yeah, let's do this. So who wants to get me started with what my first step should be? Who took a first step? I'll take any first step. Yeah, let's do it. So component.extend, and then what do we give it? I'm gonna copy paste this just so that I have that. Okay, so we give it a tag. What else?
The view.
View. I like it. So you'll notice that, and let me bump up my text a little bit. So you'll notice that I'm doing these backticks If you haven't seen them before, it just lets you do multiple lines and some string interpolation. So the big thing that we're going to use is just multiple lines, so we're not just like one big string of of the view. So what do we want in here? What do we want in our view? What HTML? Yeah. Okay. So we're going to add a div, and what attributes do we want on it?
Class edit box.
Okay. Class edit box.
Where is that coming from?
So we're just using this. We're just putting this class on because in our, let me see if I can expand the CSS. In our CSS, we have the edit box class styles.
Okay.
So that's just gonna, like you can see, gives it a min and max height, border padding, scroll. That's it. So that's why we're adding the class. We're also going to use it later to be able to like query the DOM and find that div. What else do we want on this? I'm also probably not going to be able to spell this correctly, so I'm going to copy paste. Content editable. It's true. Okay, cool. While we're at it, I'm just going to copy. If you haven't seen this yet, in the top right of all of the code examples, there's a copy button. So that's what I'm going to use to quickly like copy paste things. So let me take my text size down a little bit. Okay. So this is great, but we're not actually rendering anything in our page yet. How do we do that?
Call this out.
Yeah, so we're going to put our elements in the DOM. Sweet. And with that, we have our component being rendered. We did the content editable property correctly because I can do things like edit this. Sweet. I think that's everything that we needed to do for this section. We created our rich text editor. We have the div and the class. We have the inner content. Yeah, I think that was everything.
And what's content editable? Is that?
Yeah.
Did we create that as a custom, or is that built?
Yeah, so that's a built-in. So in the browser, if you add contents editable to, I don't know if it's every element, it's probably specific kinds of elements can take it, like paragraph tags or divs and spans and stuff like that. And then the like editing stuff for this is all provided by the browser. So we didn't have to do anything for that. It gives us a lot of functionality out of the box, but our whole exercise tonight is going to be like, great that you can edit this, and you can even use key commands in like keyboard commands to be able to like italicize things and make things bold. But we want some like UI to be able to manipulate stuff in our div. Cool. Any other questions? All right. So what I'm going to do, you can do this too. You don't have to, but what I'm going to do for all of the sections is scroll down to the solution, and I'm actually going to just hit the copy button and then replace, delete and replace everything in the JS tab and in the HTML. I'm just going to copy everything, delete everything that's in CodePen, and then paste it again. And I'm doing that just because I want to start with like, you know, everything that we've done. Cool. All right. Our next thing is we're gonna start adding buttons. So we're gonna add a bold button or a B button that when you click on it, we want to bold whatever the user has selected. We want our button to have a bold class name. We want it to be inside of a div that has the controls class, and we want that on top of our edit box. So we're gonna make a little row of controls above our box. So what do you need to know? So you can listen to any DOM event in CanJS with this on syntax. So for example, on this button, we have on, colon, and then click. So this is setting up a listener on the button for any click events. And when a click happens, we want a function to be called. We want something in our view model to be called. Remember, a view model has properties and then any methods that we need in our view. Question?
So how does it know that the button is the bold button?
So for this one, you're gonna fill out like the text content inside of the button, and then we'll like in this example, what it's doing is it has a method, and then you're gonna pass what you want the method to do to the text content.
Can you go scroll?
Yeah.
So the controls class, that's a CSS class?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we're gonna have the div with the class controls basically, and then inside of that we'll have a button, like a button element, and then on that we'll have our click handler. And in CanJS you can listen to any sorts of events. So there's dozens or maybe hundreds of different events. If you've been to another DoneJS LA, we've listened to like on a video element it has, you know, when it starts playing and stop playing and things like that. So there's any native DOM event you can listen to. So we're gonna set up our click handler, and then in our view model, we're gonna define a method. So in this kind of example, we have the button with do something, and then when the click happens, it's gonna be called, it's gonna pass this argument to the function. So do something is going to be called with the bold string as the command or CMD here. And then we're going to need to implement something here. We don't really care to like show an alert when they click the button, but we're going to need some logic to bold the text. The browsers make this ridiculously easy. There's one command called exit command, and it can take a bunch of arguments. What we care about is the first argument is bold, italic, I think there's copy. There's a bunch of things, a bunch of different commands that you can execute. So for us, when our method gets called, we want to call document.exit command. And for our bold button, we want to give it bold. And then I'm not going to talk about the boringness of what these other parameters are, but you can pass false and null. If you really wanted to get into it, you could look on MDN at the docs of what those are. Okay, I think that's everything that we need to know. So again, we want to create a bold button. We want it to have a class. We want it to be inside of a div that has a class. And then we'll need to, when you click on it, we'll need to call a method, and then we'll need to like make the text bold. So I'm going to give you guys 5 or 10 minutes to work on this on your own. And again, I'm here. Ask me questions. Happy to answer them.
Wait, so
Yeah.
is the bold button, is that a separate component from the bottom?
So you definitely could do that, but I would just put it in the same component.
Okay.
So I would just add on to the view that you already have.
So this is all you should know. So first part is the organizing, JavaScript was for organizing.
Why do you have to open it? Just close it.
So that this doesn't, because you already see those.
But I first return.
And it gets too messy over here. So this is just organizing. And then it gives it a name, pretty much. And then in the HTML, you call it by
All
its
of
name. Yeah, you call it by its name. The
So the button you actually want to input one for each one. It's a child. It's literally inside.
And then you, so this is the name, and then this is the HTML.
And then closed.
Yeah, and then close tag afterwards. And then, so,
And then I guess that's
so right after the word div at the top.
So now we're gonna add
Inside
this,
inside the
to
div.
the bold button.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to put an attribute called class. That equals, and then we can double quotes again. And then inside of there,
And
we want
see
to
the first
controls.
person.
So this is telling
So once you
the
button,
this element has a class with the name of controls. And then the CSS that tag equips, it tells everything to look. And we to look at that controls tag and add styles to it. We should go back to it. So,
now it's over. Let's go. Alright,
so the controls tag.
and now I don't know how to make it like actually bold.
So then the other thing is, right now, we don't actually have a method.
It's
called
asking.
right?
It already has the CSS.
So if we scroll down, we can add a new property. So if we delimit it with a comma. And the next one we have, we want,
No, why was the comma on the one?
Oh,
is it a comma?
On the one by itself.
Because you see this right here,
Yeah.
this is like your closing quote. So if you go all the way up, here's where it opens, here's where it closes. Right, so that's the end of this property.
Why do you mean comma?
Because we're gonna put it up another property. The property is going to be called view model. So you get that. Right? So view model capital V capital.
Oh, yeah. Alright, so just walk down Hollywood,
And then colon,
and
already sets out,
towards
and it's gonna be an object. So it's callback.
towards the grid, and then just keep walking straight,
And then-
all the way to Western.
No.
I'll send you that.
It's an object. So that is an object, the open post code.
What do you mean?
An object. So then you can put a line return in the middle, so that there's.
It's on Western, not Hollywood.
So now we want to create out right? So
Please copy and paste this in.
yeah, copy and paste it, 0.5 through 7. And then it's inside code. And we understand. Not the arrow. And then highlight lines of 21 through 25.
So,
Highlight
but
20 through 22.
So it's whenever you click,
And then tab.
it's gonna do something.
Okay. So now you can now scroll back up to your button.
Yeah, I'm missing. I know, but that's for the italics.
Okay, so this button is content. So let's give it inside those two little brackets. Now colorful.
So,
So now content.
click
Equal bold button.
X.
And when you click it, that's what it's doing. And if you scroll down, so what we're doing is we're creating a new model, which is the data and structure that backs this component we built. And then this is a component. So as HTML defined in here, so this content editable section, so this code right here. All of that is a component.
Yep.
And the component is rendered.
So what is this models?
So basically everything, like all of the line binding or the methods that you want to call view are all provided by the view model. So it can be a mix of properties that we want like live rendered. So in the count example, we have the count property that started off at 0, and then we can also define methods on it too. So like in this one, this is like shorthands for defining a method, and then that's made available in the view for you to
Discouraging.
call. So in this example, we have the onClick, and it only calls this on the view model when there's an actual click. If we wanted to, we could actually like just call it somewhere else and have the double release around it, and then whatever is returned by that method would be rendered in the DOM too.
So in other words, the view model is just kind of like waiting for action kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. So any of the like methods aren't going to be called until they're either like used in double curlies, or like there's an on click or on double click on hover on whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Cool. Yep. And I guess the last thing is that the view model, you're kind of defining all of the actions and what all of the data looks like. And that's created, a new one is created for every instance of a component in the page. So if you had multiple rich text editor elements in the page, they would each have their own copy of the view model. So they're not all like one view model that gets shared for everything.
Okay.
So. Cool. All right. How are people feeling? Good-ish. I like it. I'll take it. Let's start going through the solution. So again, so the problem, we want to add a button that has a click handler. We want it to have a class of bold. We want it to be in a div that's above the edit box. And then when we click it, we want it to actually like bold the text that's selected. Who wants to, let me minimize this. So we're actually, if you want to minimize the HTML and CSS, we're not gonna be coding in those. We'll be in JavaScript for the rest of the time. So who wants to get me started with a first step?
We could do it. Yeah.
Negative. Actually, I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna copy paste this one. What was the class?
Controls.
Controls. Thanks. We do not want it to be content editable. Okay. What's next?
Make it a button.
Add a button. And it had a class of bold, and then we want to listen for the click event. What should we call our method that we're going to define later? I'll take anything; it doesn't matter.
Do something. Some examples.
Do something. Okay. Should we pass it anything, or should we just call it do something? I'm just gonna call it do something. All right, and I'm gonna label the button bold just because I can. Okay, so we've got our bold button. We've got the on click handler. So I think now it's time to define our view model. So I mentioned this earlier. So this is like a shorthand syntax for defining a new function or a new method on the view model. So we could write it out as this: do something colon, and then it's a function. This is just shorthand. What should we put in here? What do we want to do?
Command.
Yes. I'm gonna cheat. I don't want the solution, but I do want this. So we're gonna call exit command on the document. We're gonna pass it bold and then these extra arguments. You think this will work? Should we try it? Yeah, let's do it. Okay. Cool. Okay. So now we can select stuff. We've got our bold button. So that's working. So I did something that was a little bit different than what the examples were showing. So I just have this do something and this method, and then it just has bold in here. It always passes bold. The example had things a little bit different. This had a do something and then passed it bold, and then it took an argument. Why might we want to do it like this instead of the way I did it?
Nothing else, just see it all right there.
To make it reusable.
I'll take that. So we're going to add a few buttons. We're going to add italicize. We're going to add copy all. And we're going to add our funky button. So since, at least for italicizing things, we're going to do the same exit command. It's nice to just reuse the same method and then pass the argument. So I'm going to use the CMD here. And so now whatever do something gets is what it'll pass the exit command. And then in our on click, this is where we can say bold. And then let's make sure that this still works. Yeah, that still works. Cool. Any questions, comments?
Sort of backtracking a little, but
Yeah.
do you know if there's any difference besides from a styling standpoint between a text area and content editable true?
That's a great question. So text areas, I actually don't know. In a text area, can you provide HTML inside of the text area?
Nope, there's a big difference right there.
Yeah. So that's one of the awesome things about content editable is that you can have whatever HTML inside and it'll make it editable, which is why like we have our list here, and when we hit return, it just continues that list because you're already in the list.
And content editable always goes in a div.
You could put it, so we could, if we had this, I mean, this isn't like valid HTML really, but if we changed it to a P, or let's say we had like an entire section that we wanted editable. I don't think it would work on any of like the form elements or things like that, but any of the like kind of block level section, div, span, paragraph, stuff like that should all work. Cool. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going down to the solution and then I'm going to, it was just JavaScript. I'm going to replace everything in here with what's in the solution, just so we're on the same page. I think the only thing that was different was what this was called, and I said bold instead of B. Okay, cool. Next, we're going to add an italic button. You guys have all of the knowledge already. I'm going to let you hack for a few minutes. Basically, we want to do the same thing as the bold button, except we're going to have like an italic button that has the class italic. It's also going to be in our controls div. Yeah, nothing new here. So I'll let you guys.
Jason, you can Hacker News.
Here and there.
Did you see the, I can't remember if it was Brutal or Brutalist JS, one of the two? Like a super tiny, like 2 kilobyte front end framework. That was very like Vue-esque. Thought it was kind of interesting. I was reading some of the source the other day.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Who has an italic button? I actually don't have one, but I'm raising my hand. I'm gonna have one in a minute.
Oh, actually, you just put it within the same thing. Yeah, put it within the same thing. Yeah, because I think the controls. Put a slash. Put a slash or not?
All right, shall we go through a solution together? Who wants to get me started?
Need another button.
Need another button. I'm gonna take a cue from you guys. Copy paste. Well, this one, the class was Italic.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. And yeah, you can see like it's. You could have also like, instead of the class, there's like I and if I can type. There's like I and B elements we could use. I'm gonna stick to the class for now. Oh dear. Okay.
Isn't it bold? The bold tag instead of B, or is it B?
It's B.
Okay.
There's strong, but
Oh, it's bold. Yeah.
okay. So we've got our I. What's the command that we're gonna execute? Is that it? Do we need anything else? Sweet. Let's do it. Italic? Yeah. There we go. All right. So that was the like power of like refactoring that method to just take whatever argument we wanted to give it. Is we don't have to change anything in our view model, and we can just have pass whatever we want from our view. Cool. Any questions? All right, let's add I think copy button is next. Yeah, okay. So this one's not gonna be as like just straightforward as the last one. It's not just gonna be a copy paste and to add a new button. So you are going to copy paste to like create a new button and then rename it copy all. But the logic's gonna be a little bit different. And again, we're gonna have it inside of our controls class. But the logic's gonna need to be a little bit different. So for copy all, we're gonna need to have a reference to the edit box element. So far, we've not needed to do any DOM manipulation within our view model. And that's typically good. It's better to have a view model that doesn't require the DOM so that you can create new instances of the view model and test it, and you don't have to worry about like actually rendering it in the DOM or anything like that. So this is going to be a little bit different because what we're going to need to do is actually get the we're going to need to be able to select everything that's in our edit box div so that we can copy it for the user. So we need the view model to have access to our element, and there's a standard way of doing that. In the custom elements spec, which is what CanJS's components are based off of, there's a connected callback method that gets called whenever a custom element is appended to the DOM. In CanJS, we have a connected callback method that gets called whenever the component is created and inserted into the DOM. So very, very similar to the spec. So in our view model, we can define this connected callback method, and when our custom element comes to live in the DOM, then this will run. And the argument that it's provided is the element. So this element is going to be our sum element, or in our case, it's going to be the rich text editor element. So inside of this callback, there's a context, and that is our view model instance. So we were talking earlier about how every instance of a component has its own view model. It has its own instance of a view model. So inside this, or inside the connected callback, this refers to the view model. So we can add a property to it. We can add an element property so that we can reuse that in other parts of our code. The last little bit in this example is this element any. So remember on the homepage, we had our count, and the way we define that is count and then an object and a default value. So in CanJS, we can say the property name and then give it an object and give it different values like a default or the type of property that we're expecting it to be. As a shorthand, if you don't have an object and it's just a string, then that is the type. So in our case, we're saying on our view model, there's going to be an element property, and it can be any type. It can be whatever we want it to be. So, okay, we actually talked about all of this. So the next thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to be able to get a reference to the edit box, and we can use just the standard query selector API. So on any element, it has a query selector method, and we can pass it a CSS selector to be able to get an element inside of our element that matches that selector. Excuse me. So in our case, we're going to want to get the div that has the edit box class. Sorry. Any questions before I move on to the like more intense stuff? No? Okay. So the range and selection APIs are used to get references to what's selected on the page and then be able to refer to what's selected on the page. So basically, a range is that contains nodes or text nodes in a document. So like right now, I've kind of selected part of this text. And inside here, there are text nodes of text, and then there's also this range. So like this, if we inspect this, so that's a code element. So inside here, or like what I have selected is part of this paragraph, and the range is this text node, this code element, and then this text node. And then a selection contains ranges. It usually only contains one range, and that's really the use case that we're going to look at tonight. Is a selection contains ranges. So when I select this, there's a like current selection, and then that current selection contains a range that is like from this A until after this period. So there's a few methods that we can use. So in the next step that we want to do, we want a copy all button that is going to select everything inside of the edit box and then copy that to the user's clipboard. So the first thing that we can do is we can create a new range. Basically, we want to create a range, and then we want to select everything in the edit box. So we'll use document.createRange, And then the next thing that we'll do is we'll call on our range that we created, we'll call select node contents. And we'll pass it a reference to the edit box elements. And we can, what this is essentially saying is, okay, this new range that we've created, I want it to be everything that is whatever node we pass to it. So that's how we're gonna like make a range that is the entire edit box. Then we wanna get what is currently selected in the window. So the user can have something else selected before they press the copy all button, and we're gonna get a reference to that. And we're immediately gonna clear everything inside of it. So whatever they have selected, we're gonna remove all of the current ranges. And then we're gonna add the one that we made that has the contents of the edit box. And then finally, so we've selected everything inside the edit box. And then finally, we're gonna use our good old friend exit command. And we're gonna use that to copy what's selected. And that's it, just exit command and then copy. So the result of all of that is you're gonna click a copy all button, it's gonna select everything that's inside the edit box, and then it'll copy it to your clipboard, which means you'll be able to paste it anywhere else, and it'll paste.
Will it highlight the whole box, all the text in the box?
Yeah, so when you click the, when you click the copy all button, it'll show that everything is being highlighted, or everything's being selected. Cool, that was a good question. Any other questions? No? All right, give you guys 10 minutes to hack on this. So again, we want to create a copy all button. I think you guys have that down pat. And then you'll need to set up this stuff on your view model so that you get a reference to the elements. And then when the copy all button is clicked, that's when you'll need to do all of the like range and selection stuff. So you can kind of use what's in the guide as like reference to what you need to implement. Cool. I'm happy to answer questions.
I see, that's true. That's why I do this. But like these are line streets. Let's grow, color grow. Other ways to do
What are you looking for?
Garbage can nearby?
Garbage can.
I figured it'd be one of those rooms.
No, apparently.
Yeah, apparently not.
Yeah, I don't know.
They're cheaper than
You know, the first time I saw it, I remember this game.
You got locked out.
Damn.
I think you're.
We were gonna buy some more time.
No, that's a API.
what's that thing called?
That was your first one.
Oh, it was poor. It's not for you. You know, it was bad.
You're making
It's fine though. It's fine. Trying to be a good sport. I was kind of like honestly expecting, because I took a 19 class in college. And I got 99%. So I'm like, well, I'll be good at this. And then, you know, I think what I need is like a subline. Like go, like type in literally comma. Step 2. Like,
Yeah. It's a
type
lot.
in enter.
It's a lot of.
Yeah.
It's a lot of stuff.
Right. And like Bus also started trying it out. He goes, okay, do this and this and this. And I'm like, go what? And he's like, you just gotta do it. It's command and repo. And I'm like, I don't even know what that is. So just basically he was reading it and I was watching. So I kind of just I felt like that. But I'm just reading my songs. You know, you're doing
We appreciate
great.
it.
You're doing great. Yeah, did you teach me in college?
It's not in the
Maybe
same
it's, you know, I skipped a lot of class, but.
Oh, okay, okay, that's what it was. You would have been able to.
For sure, one of the two. But yeah, one of them in Austin would like look at my books and he was dying. He was like, "You can't." He's like, "This is from like 1980," and I'm like, "Oh." Yeah, I forgot what framework or.
What
I
language?
think I used that. Yeah, that word. But look at me, I'm like just throwing around words like I know I'm talking. But yeah, we tried.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
It was
Thanks for trying.
yeah, I'll have to ask him what I was using, but either way, he thought it was really cool about what they were teaching us. I was good at it, so.
Can I help anyone? Pointing in the right direction.
Okay, we're good.
I like your decal. That's cool.
Thanks. Just comma and this.
Jason, did you like teach yourself all this? Or you self?
Yeah, when I was a teenager, I started getting into HTML and CSS
Okay.
and a different language called PHP.
Okay.
And
Ew.
it has a bad reputation.
Okay.
And yeah, that's how I got started. And then I
Okay.
learned JavaScript.
That was when you were in high school?
And that was when I was in high school.
So did you go to college?
So I did finance in college.
Oh.
And, but while I was in college, I started a business and I was still building software. It was profitable, but just barely. And
So it
that's
wasn't
why-
for finance, it was software.
It was personal finance software. So,
That's intense.
so it was a good combo.
Okay. What was what I was learning in college, my 101 class? I told them that you would like laugh at what I was learning, so it was like from the 80s or something. In IT 101. At Central. You thought it was
Is
so funny.
Were you learning a language?
This is like Fortran or
It was really
I
bad.
remember your roommate was learning Visual Basic.
Is that what I was learning? Because we did the exact same class.
Yeah, so it was probably Visual Basic. This was a year and a half, 2 ago.
Mhm.
And also they
I was
I was
good at
reading
it.
the course material and like trying to help them with it.
Yeah.
And they kept referring to pseudocode as comments.
I don't know enough about Visual Basic to know what that's about.
Yeah, it was strange.
My 101 book.
But they like wrote out some pseudocode and they kept referring to it as comments. I was like, this doesn't seem right.
Wait,
Yeah.
so did you do a boot camp?
I didn't know. This was before like boot camps were like a popular thing.
So you
dog
got into
stack.
the industry through.
Just like doing stuff like this, like you know, online courses and materials, and just like trying to learn as much as I could. So
I'm trying to break into the industry.
yeah, it just takes time. Like I feel fortunate enough to like be able to do it today, but it was because of like years of
Yeah.
just hacking and being terrible, but just like continuing to try.
It's like every year you look at what you did the previous year and you're like, what was I doing?
I mostly still feel that way. I've been programming for 15 years, and I still feel like stuff that I wrote 6 months or a year ago is not that great.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'm glad I mean, I haven't been programming nearly as long as you, but
yeah, I really feel like if you get to a point where you feel like all your code is good, then you have so much more to learn.
yeah.
That's just how it is.
Even like because there was in for applying at Pitovi, they were like, link us to one GitHub project. And I was like, I don't know, I should write something new for this. So I wrote a Gulp plugin. And I was looking at that the other day and I was like, ooh, I can't believe I got an interview out of this.
Yeah.
If you're the smartest guy in the room, you're wrong.
I'm definitely not the smartest person in Pitovi. So I'm in the right room.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It makes me feel good to work with so many people that are really, really good.
Yeah. Especially people who are like actually willing to learn instead of just being like condescending and treating you like an idiot because you don't know something.
Yeah,
That's so common, especially in the technology industry.
Yeah.
People get really mean if you don't know something.
It's sad because we're all learning. No one knows everything, and people still feel like they take the knowledge that they have and then they hold it over other people in an unnecessary way. It's sad.
I like that the Pitovi is very against that.
Yeah.
It was hard to get used to though. Like the first month or so, I was like scared to ask anyone, and then I realized like, oh hey, everyone's like genuinely happy to help.
Yeah.
Yay. Well, everyone at Pitovi, they don't really tolerate anything else. If you're not that way, they won't hire you. If you become that way, it seems like you get pushed out. I haven't actually run into anyone who's like that at Pitovi, so I don't know. But I mean, I don't know how else they would cultivate that unless they were pushing out the people who were like that, you know?
Yeah, we just those people don't make it through our hiring process. So
Right.
I don't know that we've pushed anyone out. We just don't hire people that.
So
Like
no
those
one has
are-
ever like kind of slipped through the cracks on that.
I can't think of any examples.
Oh, that's awesome.
I also haven't worked with everyone in the company, but I can't think of anyone that I have worked with that has had that attitude because
Right.
it's just not conducive to like building good applications. So
We're building.
hey Tom. Hey, what you doing? Hi. What you doing? Are you enjoying my plate?
Oh no.
It was empty. Just
Cleaning it for you.
just cleaning it.
I wrote at the next Pitovi retreat, we like rent a dog from someone
Let's bring it up.
just so we can have it.
I can find you're so cute. What are you doing?
Yeah, I'll bring our dogs
Bring
to the
ours.
next Pitovi retreat.
Motions of our dogs.
There's nothing else there. All right. How are people feeling? Should we go through? Let's do it. So, who wants to get me started? What should we do first?
All right.
Oh no.
Look, he looks like a puppy.
Should we send it back out?
Where are you, Daddy?
Come on.
Come on.
It's okay.
Yeah, here. Yeah.
Is there more napkins anywhere?
Yeah, we had.
Honey.
I have a ton of napkins.
I didn't want to steal them all.
Yeah, come here.
Chasing around.
Oops. You have napkins, just no garbage can.
Yeah. I'll throw stuff out. Thanks for doing that.
Okay.
Okay, let's try this again. Who wants to get me started?
We need a button.
We need a button. I'm gonna copy paste this one. What should I do to it? All right. Copy all. Do we need a class? We already have our controls div, so I don't think we had a class. What should our on click be? All right, sounds good. Okay. What should we implement first in our view model? I'm just gonna paste this so I remember what we called it. Yeah, what should we do? All right, let's do that first. So elements. So this is saying every view model instance is going to have an element property, and then it can be assigned any value. If it were like string or Boolean or number or something like that, it would kind of typecast it to a different value. Cool. What's next? Yeah. So connected callback is a method that will be called as soon as our custom element is inserted into the DOM. Makes me concerned that it's one of our cars.
You gonna go check? I'll go
You
check.
know what they drive?
I know what Jason
Well,
drives.
yeah, you can take me. I doubt it is, but I also don't know what my.
What your car alarm sounds like?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Oh,
Okay.
We're
it
good.
must be someone else.
We're in the clear. All right, connected callback gets called with the custom elements, which means we can do this dot elements is whatever connected callback gets called with. So now we have this dot element is in any method that we define. So this is always going to be a copy of or an instance of the component's view model. And then now we've got our this dot element. What should we do in copy all? All right, I'm going to go back to this. So it said we, okay, so this is where we're going to need to get the current selection, clear it out, create a new range, and then make it the edit box. So I'm actually going to copy paste this part. So here, this is where we can say edit box, and that'll be, it'll find the edit box div inside of our custom element. Let's call this edit box. Okay, and then we're going to need to, so we're gonna create the range and then select the node contents. I'm gonna actually just copy paste this to talk about it. So we're gonna create a new range to make that range the same thing as our edit box element. And then after that, we're going to get the current window selection. So this is going to be whatever, like when copy all runs, this is going to be whatever is currently selected. And we want to remove everything that's in our current selection so that we can add the selection that we created or add the range that we created. So get the current one, clear it, and then add the one that we created. And then our last bit is calling copy. So if we didn't have this copy and we just clicked on this, you'll see that we get everything selected. And then our last little bit that we need is to actually like copy it to the clipboard. And we can use exit command for that. Do that one more time. So I click on copy all, and then it'll select everything, and now it's in the pasteboard. And that's that. Cool. Any questions, comments?
When did they add the execute command?
How can we look that up?
Doesn't the MDN documents have like an added that?
Yeah, we can look on MDN. So I do this all the time, JS MDN, and then look at the browser compatibility. So basic support has been, like, the copy command that we're using has been there since IE9, which is pretty good. That's pretty good support for. Yeah. Cool. Brent, did you have any questions?
I'm just digesting it.
Okay.
Wait, so when we have to call removal ranges?
So when we get selection, we could have something else selected in the page when we click on copy all. So we need to clear everything that's already selected before we set the selection to our range.
Oh, yeah.
And are these CanJS functions or are these native?
So basically everything in this copy all
Yeah.
is native. So like query selector on
Right,
an
right,
element,
right. I guess I
all of the
remove all ranges. I'm not familiar with.
yeah, all of these, like on the document and window, they're all native APIs. Cool. Any other questions? Okay, what is the next? Oh, I'm gonna do the same thing that I've done this entire time, copy paste. We're gonna do one last step, and then we'll be out of time. So we're gonna add a funky button that works when selecting a single text node. So basically, we're gonna add a new funky button, and when we select like some of the text here, that's going to apply a CSS class to that part of the text, and that's how we'll get the like crazy styles. So I want to kind of show you under the covers of how this works right now. So so when we do something like make this all bold, and we're running document.exit command to make that happen, what the browser is actually doing is it's modifying that text node and wrapping it with a B element, right? That's how exit command works basically, is that when it runs, it'll do that same thing that we did, where it looks at the window, it gets the current selection, it gets the range, and then it kind of goes through the DOM and adds whatever needs to be added for that command. So in our case, like with this selected, it would see this range. Well, let's say like this learn. So that learn is just a text node, and it would basically just wrap that with whatever elements it needs to give it the style. And that's all that's happening. So we can basically do the same thing with our funky button. We can get a text node, wrap it in a span, and then add a class and give it whatever crazy styling that we want to. Or we could wrap it in, I elements or B elements. That's another way we could have like manually done the same thing as document.exit command. Cool. So yeah, let's talk about it. So we're gonna add the funky button. It's gonna have a funky class. We're only gonna worry about for right now. We're only gonna worry about like when you have some of the text selected and making that work. We're not gonna worry about like selecting everything to make that work. And okay, so what do we need to know? So we're gonna, before we were doing like window.get selection to get whatever was selected on the page, and then we were clearing the range and replacing it with what we wanted selected. We're not gonna replace what's selected right now. We're gonna get the range that's selected. We're gonna find the text node that it's associated with, And then we're gonna wrap it in a span that has the funky class. So who knows what a text node is? Okay, so what's really unintuitive when you first like start working with JavaScript and HTML is that this UL has 7 different nodes inside of it. So there's nodes and elements. Elements are nodes, and then there are specific kinds of nodes like text nodes. So this UL has 3 LI elements, and then it has 4 text nodes. Basically, all of the space between each of these is a text node. So there's the one before, one after, and then the 2 text nodes that are between. And these are just like, you know, a new line and a tab or some spaces or whatever. I'm not going to get into that flame more. So this is what the UL's children looks like, essentially. It's the text nodes and then the LI elements. So when so we kind of already went through this, but when the user selects like about here, what we want to do is we want to get that text node, we want to wrap it in a span with the class funky, and that's how we'll add our styling. So this, I think it'll actually be better for us to just like hack on this together as our like final thing. So, all right, there we go. Maybe. Oh no. Maybe. Can I like reconnect it?
Is that a building or?
Yeah, maybe not. They're not connected to anything. Maybe I need to change the input. Sorry, guys. Where did?
To the end.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, that's not. Oh, that's not. That's also not it.
Are we supposed to solve this problem too?
Yeah.
Can't you?
Could someone look at the solution?
Can't you connect the HDMI to this and then this to the Mac?
Yeah, but it won't matter if the input's wrong, right?
Well,
You don't know which HDMI or.
How did it switch?
I'm not sure.
it was on 4.
Hey, there we go.
Beautiful.
Okay. Okay. So in our, let me close this. So in our JavaScript, we have this get elements and range function defined, and essentially what we're going to do, I'll actually just like start implementing this. So we're going to add a button and call it funky. And did it also have a class of funky? Okay, so that gives it the like crazy styling. And then call this Funkify. And then we're going to define that in our view model. So I'm going to add a Funkify helper or method. Yeah, we'll do this one together. So we want to. So when our Funkify gets called, we're going to use this get elements in range helper to figure out like what we need to actually select. So kind of going through this again. If we like select about, then we want to call get elements in range with the current selection, and we want to give it the like element that we want to wrap it with, so that it ends up wrapped in the DOM, and then the last thing we want in that function is for it to be return the element that it created. So what do we need to know? we can get the current selection with the same API that we used earlier, which is window.getSelection. So I'm actually going to copy paste this, and so we can use window.getSelection to get the current selection, and the selection can contain various things. So the first thing that we need to do is check that there's a range count, that it has any. Once we know that there's a range count, then we're going to get the first range. I'm actually not sure what circumstances there are for it having multiple ranges, but we're just going to get the first one. So once we have this selected range, that's where we're going to use our helper to wrap what's at the range with an element that we want. So we're going to pass selected range to our helper, and we want it wrapped in a, we want a span created. So to actually create the span, we can use document.createElement. So we're going to do that inside of our helper. This is named the same thing. So this wrapper is going to be a span element. And then browser has a really useful API for doing the wrapping. So when I originally started hacking on this, what I thought we were going to have to do is, when you have this selected, I thought we were going to need to remove that text from the text node, create a new element, set the new element's text content to the selection, and then append it or prepend it or insert it into the correct place in the DOM. You don't have to do any of that. There's a DOM API for wrapping an element with, or wrapping a range with an element. So that's what we'll use. And then the last thing that we will need to do is add our funky class. So we could do that in our helper, or we could do that outside of the helper. I'm going to do it outside of the helper just to have the code be a little bit cleaner. So in my helper, we said we want to return the elements that we create. So I'm going to return a new array that has the span inside of it, which means now get elements in range returns an array that has the span element. So I can say this is wrappers is what's returned by get elements in range. And then that means we can iterate through it, and we can add the class. So we're going to go through the wrappers, and then for each one, we're going to add the funky class to the wrapper. I think that's it. Let's see if it works. It does not work. What else are we going to have to do? What did we miss? We got the current window selection. We got the range that's currently selected. We wrapped, we created the new wrapper element, and then we called surround contents with the wrapper, and then we returned it. That gives us an array. We iterate through each one, and then we add funky to the class list. What am I missing?
Is there any errors in the copy?
Yeah, let's look. Selected range is not defined.
Is that all?
No.
Because it doesn't create a console between, or at least JS, but it doesn't.
So the variable name being passed into the helper is range, and that was not the variable name that I was using. There we go. Sweet. Cool. Any questions, comments? All right, that wraps it for today. I thank you everyone who showed up and for going through this with me. Hopefully you learned the vast expanse of range and selection APIs that are available. This is basically how all of the like major text editors like CodeMirror, if you've ever used that in a project to have like text editing in a page. This is kind of the same principles that most of those are built with. So with that, I'll say there is more to this guide as a take-home exercise. What this actually does, so you'll notice there's a bug. We didn't do anything to make sure we only add funky to stuff that's in the text box, so we can make stuff outside of it funky. I don't know buttons. No, that doesn't work, but you know, we can select this title and make it funky. So there's more to the guide. It goes through fixing that bug, making it possible to select multiple parts of the text box to make it funky, and a couple of other things. So with that, I want to thank everyone for coming. If you are watching this on YouTube, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in 5 or 6 weeks. We'll be back in August. Thanks.